halegon en auto menein aphele, kathos ekenas periepatesin, kai autos hutos peripatein. This is a very challenging verse because some things are assumed and the order of things is really different. So hang in there. The one who says, substantive participle, in him, and the auto is Jesus, the one who says that they're in a relationship, menein, to remain. Well, this is one of those situations where you have to kind of look at different meanings of lego, which is very broad. And in this case, it probably means something like the one who claims to remain in him, because that's what John's been talking about, people who claim to be in a relationship with Jesus. So sometimes in these situations, you have to play around with different versions of what a word means. The one claiming to remain in him, and then that makes sense. Ought, okay, so that's your subject, right? Ought, just as that one, meaning Jesus, walked, peripateo, simple aorist, a compound verb, and, but in this situation, you're probably going to go with also. Then you have this autos. He, in the same way, to walk. Well, that doesn't mean a whole lot of sense. So this is probably the emphatic. Also himself in the same way to walk. Let's go ahead and phrase it, and you'll see what's going on. The one claiming to remain in him ought, and then I'm going to, just as that one walked, also himself in the same way to walk. All right. What is the main verb? What's the main verb? It's aphele, isn't it? Ought. What's the subject of aphele? Well, we already talked about. It's the one claiming to remain in him ought. And then what is the rest of the main part of the clause? It's way down here, ought to walk. So the one claiming to remain in him ought to walk. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, that's what these intervening words are about. And I'm going to go ahead and do a little space because I think we're going to need to see the separation. Just as he, meaning Jesus, walked, also he himself in the same way to walk. Okay, what's going on? Okay, these are phrases that are telling us how somebody should walk. Well, it's just as Akenos, meaning Jesus, just as he walked, so also he himself in the same way. So the meaning is pretty straightforward, right? If someone claims to be living in a relationship with Jesus Christ, ought himself to walk in the same way that Jesus walked. One of the things I like to do when main ideas get separated is draw arrows. So the one claiming to remain in him ought to walk is the basic idea. Just a straight complementary infinitive, peripatein. And then we have the explanation of what kind of walk it's like. Well, just as Jesus walked, also he himself, and again, who's this? It's this person. The one claiming to be in Christ, to walking in relationship with Christ, ought to walk. He should do it in the same way, just as Christ walked. So it's a very convoluted structure, but you get the idea. And it would have been really nice if John had repeated that verb there, wouldn't it? It's the one who claims to remain in him ought, just as Jesus walked, also he himself in the same way ought to walk. But this is part of the key that this goes down to here. Okay? If you had trouble with this verse, don't feel bad. It's a convoluted verse. And in fact, it's interesting to see how the different translations handled it. NASB, the one who says that he remains in him, so they capitalize the H, so you know that the kainos is Jesus, ought himself. See, they actually are translating autos, aren't they? Ought himself also walk just as he walked. So they're changing the order around just a little bit, but that's okay. CSB, the one who says he remains in him should walk just as he walked. Okay, you're not translating the autos. And the autos, actually, there's a variant here that some manuscripts drop it out. But ESV, whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. And you got to figure out who the him and he are. NRSV, whoever says I abide in him ought to walk just as he walked. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. The NIV adds the antecedent. The Net Bible is interesting. The one who says he resides in God ought himself, see, they're translating the autos as well, to walk just as Jesus walked. So you can see even the translations are struggling to get the structure apart, and they feel the need to identify who the kainos and the autos is. Anyway, welcome to Greek.